One of the critical things when you're reloading precision rifle ammunition is knowing where the bullet is with respect to the lands, and in this video we're going to show you 3 ways to take that measurement. Gavin Gear here from UltimateReloader.com. I'm back with Travis Fox. Thank you for joining us, Travis.
Hi Gavin, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
This is a cool story. Travis has done a bunch of work to illustrate 3 different ways to find the lands. But before we get into our demos and taking measurements and looking at the numbers, let's look at the theory. Let's look at the anatomy of a rifle chamber so that we can understand what these measurements are going to mean. And then we'll translate that to how it's going to affect your reloading process. So what I've got here is a reamer print. I'm working on this right now with Dave Manson. I've got some 223 match content coming up. So this is a 223 reamer print. But all the same concepts are going to apply for this 6 Creedmoor rifle, which I've rebarreled on the channel. If you haven't watched it, if you search on 6 Creed UR, had a Howa 1500 with a factory barrel over here, which we've sectioned on the milling machine, and then I did a rebarreling with an International Barrels barrel blank here, and with custom freebore geometry. So let's get into this. So we've got the body area of the chamber. That's where the body of the case is going to sit. We've got the shoulder area, and then ahead of that we've got the neck area, and then there's an angled transition between the neck area and the freebore. The freebore is that smooth portion ahead of the neck area where the bullet can move forward a certain distance before it starts to engage in the rifling. And that transition is called the throat. On this reamer print we've got 1.5 degrees of angle where that ramping transition is between a smooth bore and where we've got the lands that over that distance of the throat fully engage with the bullet. And so Travis, why don't you describe here with the model what we've got going on there?
So with the cutaway that Gavin did for us on the machine here, base, body, shoulder, neck, and then this is the area that we're examining right here. We jump up forward here, here's the rifling. They come into the neck, and this whole area in here is what we're looking at, this free bore area, throat area. If we insert this in here, you see right here is where you're going to trim your case, then your bullet is going to come out, and your ogive is going to contact the rifling out here. We're going to be measuring this area from the end of the case mouth to the rifling into the lands there.
Why don't we shove one of these in that has the bullet on there so you can see how that moves around a little bit. And you know, for bench rest loaders, this is something where a few thousandths of an inch will make a difference in terms of bullet seating depth or accuracy. Sometimes you're into the lands where the lands are starting to compress the ogive of the bullet. The ogive is that curved portion that's going to contact the rifling. So sometimes you're away from it, right? 10, 20, 30 thousandths of an inch, up to 150 thousandths.
Mag length.
Yep.
Mag length, you're going to be back away from it.
Definitely.
So I'm going to slide this in. Marked the bullet here. You'll be able to see when the bullet ogive contacts the rifling, the lands, it's going to push it back.
There we go, right there.
So this bullet right now is seated up against the lands.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see the ogive and the lands intersect right about here.
So this is what we're looking at when we're talking about all these measurements and when we're doing these precise bullet seating depth adjustments, is where are we with respect to that point where it first starts to contact the rifling.
Yeah. So we're going to pull this out. And you can see here, when we jammed this in, the bullet is stuck in the lands, in the rifling. If you were to do this on the bench, you'd end up spilling powder all in the action of your magazine.
Mm-hmm. And this can actually happen. A lot of bench rest shooters will run very low neck tension, and they'll be jamming the bullet into the lands, and if they don't shoot the cartridge, it's very likely the bullet is going to stick and powder is going to come flying out.
So this is a great example of what you can do with your bullet. If you're seated way long, way out in the lands, you can get your bullet stuck in there. We have this awesome rod to pop this out.
Yeah, this is a Delrin plastic rod, and I use this all the time when I'm doing these measurements, because you'll see when we do the measurements we can have the bullet stick just like that.
So maybe do we want to talk about why we want to know this?
Sure.
Why we want to have this information?
Yep.
Okay, so one of the reasons we're going to learn our chamber anatomy here is to set our reloading dies up properly. There's measurements you can take to do your shoulder bump and measurements you're going to take to seat your bullets, which is what we're talking about. So we're learning where we're going to seat our bullets, whether we want to have them at mag length, whether we want to run them off the lands, if we want to chase the lands. Eric Cortina, don't get upset at that. We're teaching people this. But if you want to chase the lands, here's how you're going to do it. So you're going to take this measurement from where the bullet contacts the lands, and that's where you're going to start. And then you're going to adjust your seating die. You're going to adjust your ring up and down on your seating die or your micrometer die, whichever it is, and get your bullet seated further in the case, depending on all the measurements you take.
So there's another half of the equation. Can I see the cartridge? And that's, what if you want to take a particular load where your bullet is seated to an exact specification? Now, one of the considerations here is you might want the rear bearing surface of the bullet to be ahead of the neck shoulder junction, so that where a donut can sometimes form, you don't get that inconsistency. Well, with this same knowledge, I've used this knowledge on the lathe when I'm chambering a rifle, so that I can set the throat to the exact position where I'm optimized for case capacity, the load characteristics, and then I'm also where that specific bullet has its bearing surface very precisely located with respect to that neck shoulder junction. So the most common use here is going to be, we need to set the bullet seating depth with our seating die. But this knowledge does extend to, what if you wanted to have a custom rifle made? And what if you wanted to specify to the gunsmith, you know, where do I want all this? And if you have a detailed understanding of all the principles at play, you're going to know how to do that.
No, the other thing is, this is going to be very dependent on the bullet that you're shooting also. So you're going to have the bullet that you're going to shoot, that you're working on your load with.
Different boat tails are going to affect where that bearing surface starts from the back of the bullet, and then the ogive shape is going to change where it's going to contact the rifle. So unfortunately, you might end up, and if you have OCD, this could be good news. You'll end up building an entire rifle, the chambering portion at least, around a particular bullet for a particular cartridge for a particular load. And this is part of the fun of this kind of work with reloading and rifle building, is we get to go to that level. So why don't we next take a look at 3 different ways to find the lands.
All right. First off, we're going to show the Hornady OAL gauge. This takes a modified case. This is a fired case that Gavin has been so kind to drill out and tap to fit the gauge.
I've got a separate story for this. If you're curious how to make your own, you could even get by with a drill press on that, but you do need a very specific tap.
So you can see right here that we're threading this all the way on. It bumps up against the base of the cartridge. So now I'm snugged up against the base of the cartridge. This rod is going to push the bullet up into the bore. We take our Hornady A-tip here. This is a fired case, so this bullet slips in here. This is loose. We're going to demonstrate on here what we're going to do on this rifle, but we're putting the cartridge in.
Why don't you seat the bullet artificially deep so we can show the rod pushing it forward?
Deep. Okay, so kind of rattling around there. Going in here. I'm going to push this up. The cartridge base is going to go all the way up in, so you can see in here that the shoulders are contacting.
His headspace.
Everything is there. I'm loose on the rod in here. Now watch the bullet here. We're going to push the bullet up into the rifling. Now it's snugged up in there. What we're going to do is we're going to take and tighten this knob or nut, whatever you want to call it.
A quick note, I was just discussing this with Gordy Gritters. You just did this the correct way, which is to let the plastic rod relax so that it's perfectly straight and then tighten the nut. If you apply too much pressure to this, you'll get a very slight buckling inside the sleeve here, and that'll give you a little inconsistency.
If Gordy tells you to do it, it's probably a good idea.
That's right.
So what you need to do now is we're going to come back here. I've got this snug into the rifling, so if I don't push this out, it's going to stay in there.
We should have our position preserved with the rod. So
now the really cool thing about this tool is it's cut out right here for the blade. So calipers are zeroed.
Here we've got the Short Action Customs comparator set, which is
how
really
I like
nice.
these.
One of the big differences here is that the Short Action Customs has a slight bevel to match the ogive angle, And so it'll give you a little bit of a different number, but this should repeat incredibly well between our different techniques we're going to show here. 2.214.
I'm going to write this down. 2.2145. This is on the Howa factory barrel.
Yep. And again, these are all relative measurements, right? We're going to be comparing the different methods to see how consistent they are.
Okay, now demonstrate on
Yep.
the custom here.
This is where we'll be comparing the real results, because we have to have the rifle for one of our techniques.
So again, bullet is loose. We go in the chamber here. I've got the rod snugged into the chamber. We're going to push the bullet up into the lands. Tighten.
So yes, the bullet did indeed stick, and then we just give it a little tap, and it's going to come out.
Okay. So we've got this tight. So what we do is we put this.
I'm micromanaging Travis here. Too many cooks in the kitchen, right?
Tight, tight, tight. Okay, let's see what our real world is here on this rifle.
What we're comparing here is actually the free bore that I cut here versus what Howa cut at the factory. 2.186. We have a shorter chamber by far. Now what I did was I seeded a cartridge with a Hornady 108 ELDM bullet in it, and I sent it to JGS. And they actually worked with me on the math on the 6 Creed UR
this one?
reamer. Yep.
So
show that.
This is the reamer that this chamber was cut with.
Yep.
I'm going to match it up to see what it looks like
Yeah.
in here.
So I seeded the bullet how I wanted it, and they built me a reamer that's going to have the optimal free bore for that particular load that we were testing. Pretty cool.
Yeah, see, it's tighter. Unless you turn it, it won't go in there.
So what's cool here is that you can see the bushing. The bushing is riding in the rifling there.
Pretty close, but it's a little different, but interesting.
Very slightly different. Yep. Okay, so we have our final number from this rifle. Let's talk about the pros and cons of the OAL gauge technique.
Okay, pro, that was pretty easy.
Yes. Different bullets, no problem.
No problem.
Throw them in.
Yep. Yeah, I like it. It's simple, it's easy. The con, well, you have to have a fired modified case. So we do have to have a few tools to do that.
Hornady does sell the modified cases, but they're not guaranteed to fit your rifle's chamber perfectly like a fired case will.
Right.
Yep. So if you click on that first link in the video description, we'll have a list to that special tap and the special drill bit that you're going to need to create your own modified case.
Yep. It is a pretty handy tool though.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, the pros are it's repeatable, it's easy, and it's fast.
Now you can use this on multiple cartridges as
Yep.
long as you have the modified case.
As long as you have the
can use it
modified
on
case.
all kinds of different.
It's also inexpensive. I think the kit is about $40 or so for the OAL gauge, and then you're going to need the modified cases. Yeah, and the cons just being, you know, it gives a different type of result because your head spacing on the shoulder compared to when you're going to have the bolt in the rifle, and it's going to be chambered the way that it normally is. Now these are all relative measurements, so that might not matter.
Right.
And of course, the con is that you need the modified case.
Yeah.
Right.
That's okay.
Okay. So
I've got you here though.
That's right. We have multiple lathes. So that is the OAL gauge technique. And on to the Loctite trick.
So this is a method that we have seen by Pete Milan and Matt Hornback.
Yep, Pete Milan, Impact Shooting. What's up? Matt, thanks for the trick. This is pretty simple. We're just going to glue a bullet in by chambering a dummy round.
A little Loctite on your Q-tip.
This is a fired case because we need that bullet to slip, right, and not get bound up.
All right. A little swab action on your.
Hopefully it's on the inside. Okay.
We're going to do both of these here so you can see what's going on.
Yeah. One real one and one demo cutaway chamber
So
gluing. And then we can look at the relative differences here as we go as well. That would be kind of interesting.
So I'm going to fit this one in. So smear it in. It's in.
Okay.
I don't have a bolt on this, so we're just trying to
We're simulating.
just kind of get this pushed nice in all the way.
Now,
All
what's
right.
interesting is on the real rifle, if we have a fire formed case, so basically the same thing should be happening here.
Yeah.
All right, so I've smeared some on there. I'm gonna put another coat on here. Let's get a little more in here. Just another drop.
Always one more.
Yep. All right, a little bit of extra there. Slip the bullet in. Put this. The bolt.
Got it extended pretty long.
Yep. Make sure that it doesn't get tipped. Yeah, it looks like that's going to work good. And then just down. Okay. Now we need to wait 5 or 10 minutes. All right, so we got a little distracted around the shop. We probably only needed to wait about 5-10 minutes, but it's been over half an hour. We should be plenty good now to check our Loctite bullet. Call it 2.2.
Yeah.
Yeah,
2.2.
2.200. I'm going to remove this guy here. Took out our ejector. Talk more about that later. Actually put these the other way around. Matter of personal preference. Okay, so we're going to spin this ever so slightly to get that seated nicely. 2.1565. Okay. So that's the basic idea. That should tell us where we're at the lands for a given bullet in a given chamber. Next, we're going to show you a different method entirely. So the third method, there's actually 2 variations on this, right? You got the simple, and then you got a little bit more complex.
Yeah. I'm sure somebody will make a comment in here. Well, I've got another method, so I'm sure there's 4 or 5 or 6 of them.
Right.
Which is fine. We can open those.
So why don't you demonstrate to me your method in
so
this space?
Eric Cortina uses a method that's on his bench rest guns where he's doing this method where he's having the bolt fall down like this, and he's going back and forth with his seating die and all that stuff. But the other way,
if you seat the bullet precisely enough, when it stops touching those lands, it will then basically drop down.
Right.
Yep. So you have to hone in on that,
yes,
that precise seating depth where that will happen.
Now another method that I've done, take a sized case, bullet is seated long in there, and we're putting the whole unit in here, and we're forcing the bullet into the lands, forcing the bolt down.
Okay.
So it's seating the bullet into the lands, into the case, all simultaneously. We're going to pull it out.
.156, and we got 2.1565 with the Loctite.
And what did the OAL gauge get?
2.186. That actually pushed it in even further. I'm really surprised.
So I'm kind of smashing it. So the other thing you can do is you can take a black Sharpie on the tip here. You Sharpie that up, and then you can see the lands groove into the bullet, and it'll seat it into the lands. So you're squishing the bullet into that.
Yep.
So you're going to get a little variation. I would say pick a method and stick with that method in all of your measurements. So you're being consistent. Don't jump around with a different style, I guess is what I would say.
If you want to compare data, it's helpful to compare apples to apples.
Exactly.
Okay. So there's your third method. So let's talk about how these 3 methods compared. With the OAL gauge, we had 2.2145 for the Howa barrel. We had 2.186 for 6 Creed UR, right? We've got different free bores. Yep, this guy right here. With the Loctite, we had 2.200 for the Howa, and we had 2.1565. So these are interesting to compare, right? Because we're pushing in with the rod, with the OAL gauge, with a fair bit of force. And with the Loctite, it's basically just, it's slipping in and it's gluing in place. So it's just less forces.
It's just coming up to the lands. It's not, it's not pushing into them.
Right. There's not a whole lot to push it there because it's a very loose slip fit between the bullet and the case. So in both cases, the bullet went further into the lands when we jammed it with the OAL gauge by 29.5 thousandths of an inch in the case of this particular rifle, and about 14.5 thousandths of an inch, so half the difference when we compared the Howa results. Now what's really interesting is with Travis's method, where we just jammed the bullet in and seated it when we dropped the bullet, we had the same exact result as when we used the Loctite method on the 6 Creed UR.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I kind of like your method because of its simplicity, to be honest.
Pretty easy.
Yeah.
I have, caveat here, I have done this in the past, and I have gotten a bullet stuck in the bore. But, you know, with the cleaning rod, it's pretty easy just to push it out. It's not rammed in there. It's just a little tap, and it comes right out.
Yep, and I use the oil gauge when I'm chambering rifles quite a bit. So when you've already got that set up, you know, it's not too much more work to do that when you're reloading. So here's what we want to know is, what method do you use to find the lands and why? Drop a comment and we'll start a discussion. Thank you, Travis, for joining us.
Thanks, Gavin.
That concludes this video, and that means it's time to wrap it up. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. Also, make your voice heard. If you have something to say, please drop a comment. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications, because you're not going to want to miss the awesome content that is coming up. And finally, flex your reloading pride. You could look great in one of these t-shirts. We've got multiple designs at the Ultimate Reloader store. I'll see you later, because I'm off to go shooting.